Hi everyone, PV here, and welcome to my new YouTube video. In this week's video, I'm going to talk about the top 5 cards from Modern Horizons 2. So Modern Horizons 2 is a deck that is not part of Standard. The cards are only legal in Modern and in Legacy. So these are the formats we're going to be analyzing. And keep in mind that it's a very powerful set. So there are a lot of cards that could belong in the top 5. This is just my opinion right now, based on what is seen the most play, what I expect to see the most play in the future. But if I don't put a card in the top 5, it doesn't mean it's not a very good card. It doesn't mean I don't think it's going to see any play. It's just that there are, 20 cards that I could put on this list. So, this is my top 5. In 5th place, I'm going to cheat a little bit, and I'm going to put 2 cards, but they're very similar, and I honestly don't know how to order them, and I think there are 5 and 6, so I'm just going to put the 2 of them together. There are Ragavan Puffer, the monkey, and Dragon's Rage Channeler. So they're very similar cards in the sense that there are, 1 mana red creatures, and they often compete for the same spot. Ragavan is just a better aggressive card in general, but we aren't seeing it see a lot of play in straight-up aggressive decks, right? You don't see a lot of, burn decks with Ragavan and whatnot. You see it in Delver-style decks, right? Blue-red, or sometimes black-red, or even Jund. And that is kind of the same place you see Dragon Rage Channeler, right? Dragon's Rage Channeler, or whatever that's called. Because it is a Delver-type card. And they are both, I think, arguably better than Delver of Secrets itself in Legacy, right? Legacy is the true Delver of Secrets format, but I think Dragon's Rage Channeler is arguably a better card than Delver in that format, and so is Ragavan. So I think the two are just very, very good tempo cards in general, because they cost only 1 mana, they're very easy to play, and they do a lot for you. So once these cards are in play, you don't need to add much else to your battlefield to be able to win the game, right? So you can play them, and then you can start reacting to what your opponent is doing. And the Channeler will filter your draws with the Surveil ability, as well as just eventually becoming a 3/3 flyer. And the Ragavan will both give you more mana and give you access to your opponent's cards, so it's drawing new cards, every turn, so to speak. It's not exactly draw a card, because you have to cast it that turn, but it is, a very powerful ability if you connect. So they both go in the same kind of deck, and that kind of deck is the Delver-style decks. I think this type of deck has been good for a while, and will continue being good with these cards. And my number 4 is the most boring card on the list. It's Counterspell. Counterspell has been, a staple ever since it was released, I think, way back when. People have been playing Counterspell. It's been one of the best cards. It is a card that has seen a lot of play in Legacy, right? I remember when I played Miracles, I played a couple of copies of Counterspell in Legacy. So it's no surprise that it becomes one of the better cards in Modern, since it's, much more low power than Legacy is. But Counterspell is, if it's very good for Legacy, I guess I wouldn't say very good. If it's good for Legacy, it is going to be good for Modern as well. And we're seeing it in a variety of decks, right? Obviously, all of them are blue-based decks, because it does cost double blue. But I think you see Counterspell in Azorius decks, you see Counterspell in mono blue decks, you see Counterspell in Grixis and Izzet and decks like that. So it is a card that we're going to see a lot from now on in any sort of blue control deck. I think it's going to be the default Counterspell that you can play in the format. Right? Before, you always had choices, am I going to play this one or this one or this one? And then now it's all going to be Counterspell all the time, as long as you can support it with your mana base, which most blue-based control decks should be able to. Especially because you're already so incentivized to have a lot of blue mana because of Archmage's Charm and Cryptic Command to an extent. So if you can cast these cards, you can definitely cast Counterspell, and once you can cast Counterspell, it becomes very, very good. And the 3rd card on my list is Charlotte's Agent. Charlotte's Agent is a card that, has seen Legacy play, just like Counterspell, but that I actually didn't like very much in Legacy. So I was always a fan of the Counterspell decks. I was never a big fan of the Charlotte's Agent decks, because I think in Legacy it just wasn't strong enough of a card. But in Modern, I think it's much better. And there are 2 main ways you can use the card in Modern. The first way is just as a fair card. Right, you're paying 3 mana, you're getting a 2/2 and something else. I've seen it used in this capacity in decks like Domain Zoo already, right, with the new cards, Territorial Kavu, the new Draco. So it is a card that you can play just like you would play Bloodbraid Elf. Because Bloodbraid Elf is a card that, mostly saw playing fairy decks. It saw playing some unfairy decks as well, but it was mostly because people wanted to pay 4 mana, get a 3/2, and get another card. And sometimes you want to pay 3 mana, get a 2/2, and get another card on top of it, right? And, it's a gold spell. There are some synergies with that as well. So that is definitely one way you can use the card. but I don't think it's the best way. The best way is to really exploit the cascade mechanic, which is, one of the most powerful mechanics in Magic and has been responsible for a lot of broken decks. And right now, the best Shardless Agent deck, I think, is just the Timur version that is trying to cascade into Ancestor Vision and Crashing Footfalls. Right, so it's not as all-in as the Living End deck, right? The Living End deck is just really trying to cast Living End every game and have that be enough to win the game. This deck is not like that. It plays more like a normal deck, and because you have cards like Fire Ice nowadays, you have cards like Subtlety, these are cards that you can put in your deck and use to interact early in the game without messing up your Cascade, because their cost is bigger. So I think that deck is actually quite strong, the Crashing Footfall Shardless Agent deck, right? Getting a 2/2 and 2/4 force for 3 mana is no joke. So I'm a huge fan of that deck right now, and I think Shardless Agent is probably the big reason why this deck can even exist. So this card is my third choice in my top 5. My second best card from Modern Horizons 2 is Osmo. If I struggled to pronounce Bloodbraid Elf a while ago, I'm not even going to try to pronounce this card. But you know what card I'm talking about is right on the screen. And obviously, it's kind of a package deal with the Underworld Cookbook, right? Because they don't have to, but they'll always be in the same deck because they're just very synergistic with each other and one searches for the other, etc., etc. So I'm going to consider them one card. And this package, I think, is super, super strong, right? The Osmo by itself is just a 1 mana 3/3 creature. That you get to draw a card when you play, with one extra ability on top of that. And yeah, the card is always the Underworld Cookbook, but that's still very, very good, right? That's still very, very strong, and there are so many ways to enable it, right? Just cycle Street Wraith, and then you can play it on turn 1, right? Or just use your Underworld Cookbook to play it, right? So there are a lot of ways to play it. Playing it is not the biggest problem in the deck. And then once you have that going, it's just so easy to, abuse these interactions, because you can use, for example, obviously there's the Cauldron Familiar aspect of it, right? You can just sacrifice the foods that you generate to bring back Cauldron Familiar, and you can actually bring back Feasting Troll King with it, right? That's, the new Hogak, so to speak, is a Feasting Troll King style deck that plays Osmo and just generates a lot of food to bring back the trolls, right? So you get to cheat this super big creature into play very early because of the Underworld Cookbook. You can also play Ovalchase Daredevil, right? That is a good combo with the Cookbook because you discard the Daredevil to the Cookbook, then you create a food, and that brings the Daredevil straight back to your hand. And that's going to fuel any number of Cookbooks, right? Because the Cookbook itself is not legendary. Osmo is legendary, but Cookbook is not. So you can have 3 or 4 Cookbooks in play, and then, you discard, you have 1 Daredevil, you already enable all these activations for free for the rest of the game. And what do you do with all this food? Well, one of the things is, again, return Feasting Troll King, right? Or you can sacrifice the food to Asmoran itself, because, you sacrifice some foods to kill a creature. Or you can use Academy Manufacturer, which is a card that turns food into food, treasure, and clue, right? So you're going to be generating mana, you're going to be potentially drawing extra cards in the long run. So these are all interactions that Asmore facilitates, right? So Asmore Cookbook, I think we certainly haven't seen the last of them. They can see play in a lot of different shells. You can produce a lot of artifacts that you can then use to enable the affinity cards, like Thought Monitor, for example. It becomes very easy to cast a Thought Monitor if you're making a food every turn, right? Or Urza is also a card that really benefits from having a ton of artifacts. So the uses are many in many different shells. So I certainly don't think we've seen the last of them, and they're probably going to become modern staples, I think, until something changes radically with the format. And my number 1 card, which should be no surprise if you've followed social media at all since the last couple weeks, is Ursa Saga. A lot of jokes about how it managed to be better than the set it's named after, and so on and so on. And Ursa Saga is a card that, honestly, I admit that at first, I did not see how good that card was going to be. Obviously, it's a card that's potentially good, right? It creates tokens, and it tutors, and adds mana, and it does a lot of different things. So the potential for it to be broken is certainly there, but I did not think it was going to be as strong as it's proven itself to be. And why is it so strong? Well, it's because it does 2 very different and very useful things, right? The first one is it creates constructs. And, you can create a construct on turn 3, and then on turn 4 with the trigger on the stack, before the 3rd trigger resolves, you can create another construct. And that's often enough power to win the game by itself. These constructs are really strong, right? You can create a construct once you create one and the second one, and then the third chapter will go off, you get another artifact. They're already 3/3s, right? And 3/3 is not that big, obviously, but you're going to have some more artifacts laying around, right? So if you played an artifact on turn 1, an artifact on turn 2, which is definitely doable, they're 5/5s already. And, that's pretty strong. And they keep growing as long as you play more artifacts. And then, we just talked about a card that generates a lot of artifacts, the Underworld Cookbook, right? It is itself an artifact, and you can discard a card to make a food that's also an artifact. So by itself, it's going to, add 1 power and toughness to your construct every turn of the game, as long as you have enough fuel. So this is definitely a very strong ability from Ursa Saga that I underestimated. And then you factor in that a lot of decks that play Ursa Saga are not decks where you would traditionally want removal spells against. So for example, imagine you're playing the Lantern deck, right? Your Lantern Control. You're sideboarding against the Lantern deck. Are you going to keep Path to Exile in your deck? No, right? You're not going to keep a card like that. Are you going to keep Fatal Push? No, it has no uses. So especially after sideboard, a lot of Ursa Saga decks can just run away with the game by making these constructs and attacking with them, because the opposing decks are not ready to deal with a big creature, and they shouldn't be ready, because this is the only creature in your deck, and it's not even a creature, it's a land. So if they can answer the creature, it doesn't really matter, right? You didn't lose anything, you didn't spend a lot to get that effect, and you get 2 of them, right? And if they can't answer them, then you can just win the game on the spot a lot of the time. And then the third chapter is where the rest of the money is, so to speak, because there are a lot of very strong 1-mana artifacts that you can search for in Modern right now. For example, the Lantern deck that I mentioned. You can search for Lantern, or Codex, or Grafdigger's Cage, or Pithing Needle, so there's a lot, or Underworld Cookbook itself, right? So there's a lot of space in that 1-mana artifact to find specific bullets, right? So you can just put 1 Pithing Needle in your deck. It's not that hard, right? It's a pretty strong card versus a lot of decks, and then you have 5 ways to access it, because you have Ursa Saga, which is land, right? So that is a pretty powerful effect. It also helps finding combo pieces such as Amulet of Vigor, right? The Amulet Titan deck was already reasonable before the introduction of Ursa Saga, and now you have a land that finds your combo piece. So the combination of both of these things, first it produces a threat, or 2 threats that are very strong, can win the game by themselves, and especially go around a lot of the sideboarding your opponent might have. And second, it just helps finding either your combo piece, in case of Lantern or Amulet, or a hate card, in case of Needle or Grafdigger's Cage. So the combination of these 2 things makes this the strongest card in Modern Horizons 2. Is it unbeatable? No, of course not. It is a card with 2 types, so you can answer it either as an enchantment or as a land. So basically any color can answer it, right? Because any color is capable of answering either of these permanents. And if you have effects like Blood Moon or Spreading Seas, that just kills it flat, right? Because of how the rules work, if there's a Blood Moon in play, Ursa Saga will go straight to the graveyard. So it is not impossible to answer by any means, but it is also not the type of card that you win the game by answering, right? Because it is just a land. So your opponent still has the rest of their deck. You still have to deal with whatever it is that they're doing, right? You're just dealing with the card that facilitates all of it. So you're dealing with the bonus card, right? You're not dealing with the cards themselves. It's not like you're playing versus a combo deck and you destroy a combo piece, right? You're playing versus Splinter Twin and you exile all Splinter Twins, therefore they can't win anymore. This is not how it works. They can still win with whatever they were winning with before. So, yeah, the card is very, very strong, and the decks that it's played on don't depend on it. So even if there are answers, they still get to play Magic normally. You've just answered one of their lands. And the fact that you get all this advantage on the land is what makes the card that strong. So that's what I got for today, and if you want to support my work a little bit more, make sure to check out my Patreon page. It's patreon.com/PVDDR, and there you can support my work and get some extra perks on top of it. And as always, special thank you to my biggest supporters: Adam Rinsey, Adrian Camilleri, Daniel Luce, Foxy, Fernando Vizeu, Joffrey Whitehead, Harlequin the King, Igor Petrov, Jaime Gonzalez, Calvin Pang, Kevin Massey, Lawson, Mattia Giardini, Richard Gerges, Sylvia Leticia, TJ Webb, Thomas Pokorny, and Dmitry Kilnov. I really appreciate the support, and see you next week.